Welcome to Name 3 Songs. I'm Sarah Fagan.
And I'm Jenna Million, and this is a podcast where we challenge sexism in the music industry and empower fangirls. Because let's be honest, fangirls knew about that band way before you did.
And if you stick around long enough, we'll also let you in on some new music that girls are already crazy about.
So, as of late, we've had a lot of really fun collaborations. Last week, we talked to Mariah Sherman, who is the boy band expert. And then we also talked to Leslie Chow, who is an author and music writer, and dived into strange women in pop music who are a lot smarter than the critics make them out to be.
Yeah, and we've really enjoyed sort of deep diving more into pop music because I feel like over the past couple years, Jenna and I have fully gone into admitting how much we truly love and appreciate pop, which I feel like is a big growth for most women. Just being able to out and proud yell about pop music, which is quite exciting. So we hope that you've been enjoying what we've been putting out. If you want to help support the podcast, you can do so by joining us at patreon.com/name3songs, where we do an extra episode once a month. We have a Discord community. You get bloopers, you get all fun things where you sort of get to be in the know about what's happening on the podcast before everybody else does.
And if you don't want to commit to like a monthly payment, we also now have a PayPal. So if you really enjoy the episode, you can give us a little tip over on PayPal,
which is paypal.me/name3songs.
And last but not least, giving us a review on Apple Podcasts is always a big help. Whether or not you listen on Apple, it's really easy. If you have an iPhone, if you have a Mac, you have an Apple account, you can go leave us a little review. We really appreciate it. So, Sarah, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about garbage men in the world of music. So basically what we are doing today is we are joined by Troy McEady of Dunzo Podcast, who Jenna will tell us a bit more about in a second, but he is just a pop culture expert, and he joins us to talk about these incredibly talented women in pop music who have unfortunately gotten themselves into very abusive, manipulative relationships, whether that be becoming intimate with the people that they work with or just being in a relationship with somebody that they sort of view as more powerful than them in music, and that man sort of taking advantage of their trust in them. We visit the past, we visit the present, we talk about, I think, some very iconic relationships throughout pop music, but I don't want to give too much away because I want you guys to listen to what we talk about today. So, Jenna, do you want to tell everybody a bit about Troy?
Troy is a host of the Dunzo Podcast, all around pop culture extraordinaire expert. I really don't know how he hasn't written a book at this point because he has so much knowledge locked away in his brain. His podcast is incredible. He does a lot of deep dives on celebrities, celebrity relationships, Britney, Christina, like literally anyone you name it, he's done something about. So we're so excited to have him come talk on our podcast and talk about these relationships. Super excited to welcome Troy of Dunzo to our podcast. Thank you, Troy, for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited.
And also, we're so ecstatic that you could come on for this topic because you are pretty much the expert when it comes to celebrity relationships and pop culture in general. So we're excited to get into this topic with you. And today we are focusing on the men who have exploited pop stars throughout their careers. And this goes all the way back to the 50s and 60s. We're going to touch on some historical examples and, look at the ways in which these men have controlled the relationships. So kicking it off, we're going to take a look at Phil Spector and Ronnie Spector. So for those of you who are not familiar, Ronnie and Phil Spector were married from 1968 to 1974. Phil Spector is known for creating the Wall of Sound, which influenced a lot of artists. It started with the girl groups and boy groups of Motown into inspiring the sound of the Beach Boys. He worked with the Ramones. He worked with the Beatles. He has a huge impact on rock history, music in general. And Ronnie Spector was from the Ronettes, which is one of those girl groups that he started working with really early on. They kind of fell in love through the music. And she said that he was amazing to work with in the studio, but a lousy husband. And essentially, once they got married, he kind of locked her up in his mansion and she was not allowed to leave. He controlled everything. Like, she had to escape barefoot from the mansion in 1972, which was like 4 years into their relationship, and they didn't even get divorced until 2 years after that. So there's honestly like a lot of horrific details surrounding her being a captive part of Phil Spector's life. And then I think it's interesting that she also still kept the name, which she said was because like otherwise her career would have been ruined. Like she had to have the name for that credibility.
There's so much wrong with this relationship. But the things that always sort of stick out to me is like, number one, she is like this incredibly talented woman, has a beautiful voice, and she was so young when they met, and they would write songs together. And once they like got into a relationship, when they would go and write songs together, he'd be like, we're gonna release this is gonna be the next big thing. And next thing she would know, she'd hear her song that she created with her husband as like a love letter to each other being sung by somebody else on the radio. And all this time, as Jenna said, like she was kept captive in like this mansion where there was guard dogs around, there was barbed wire. He wouldn't let her wear shoes in the house because he was afraid that if she was wearing shoes, she would run away. And he also kept like this glass coffin, which is like, this is the most fucked up thing that
this is some Marilyn Manson shit.
like he literally
honestly.
he had a glass coffin that he kept like on display in the house, and anytime she would do anything or he'd like think she was gonna run off or whatever, he'd be like, if I catch you, like you're going on display in this coffin. Like he would just threaten her all the time. And
I just think like the parallels between these relationships, like between all relationships that start like this, like behind every talented female artist is some psychotic guy. You know what I mean? Like either one or like a bunch. But it's true. And the parallels are so similar. And it's so weird how this kind of like completely unnormal amount of power that these people have, the result is so similar. You know what I mean? There's such a pattern, even that long ago. Like that sounds like it could happen today, honestly. And like it does happen today.
Yeah, it was essentially the blueprint, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, it sounds like this is like a gaslighting 101 scenario. But on top of that, Phil Spector was known to like carry a gun in the studio and had shots at John Lennon and threatened the Ramones, allegedly. So dude is like known to be like kind of crazy. And here's the icing on the cake. In 2009, he was convicted of murdering actress Lana Clarkson in his California mansion in 2003. So also, dude passed away early January 2021. He was still in prison when he passed, and there was a lot of like mixed feelings coming out of people saying, well, he was a genius, but like also he killed someone. And I think that's one of those lines that we haven't figured out how to.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's different with like, you know, the Me Too movement. We're seeing a lot of like alleged abusers and people going to court and all this stuff. And it's like, do you still support that person? Whereas like Phil Spector was convicted of murder, but also one of the influential people in music. So like, where do we fall in there? I don't know. It's a confusing time.
The Rolling Stone article that I read about him said that he is the perfect example of the art always being better than the artist, like no matter what the circumstance. Yeah. And honestly, after recording the podcast that I record for so long and having to like constantly come to terms with people being terrible, I'm just like, okay. So pretty much everybody in Hollywood, because of the narcissism, the addiction issues, you know, this like completely abnormal world that they create around themselves, like this like weird bubble. It's like, in a sense, they're all sort of terrible in different ways. And it's like, I think that at the end of this is just like my opinion. And I think that everybody should be entitled to like handle it however they feel. But I do think that we should allow ourselves a certain level of grace when it comes to separating it, because it's like, what are you supposed to fucking do on Halloween when you hear Thriller at Walgreens? Are you gonna leave? You know what I mean? Like, but like also you're allowed to know that Michael Jackson could possibly be a completely fully deranged person who has really fucked up thoughts, but also you like Man in the Mirror. Yeah. I just think it's like, it's torturous to be like, I have to, you know what I mean? Because you can't. Everybody is terrible, and it's only a matter of time before you find out that your faves are problematic. Yep. You know what I mean? Like,
I think it's such the truth.
Wild.
And I think that this was proven so much in like that even the people who know these people and know firsthand how deranged they are, that like you don't really know how to handle it. Because so like in 2018, Ronnie Spector talked to people, and in this People interview, Ronnie Spector shares like a never before heard story about her relationship with Phil Spector, which is that one day he gets her in a car and is like, I have a surprise for you. And he had adopted twins without telling her. And now these kids are like 52. It wasn't very clear in the story if they like kept the kids or like what was happening there. But so it was just wild. But also in this interview, she said that it was so dark back in those days. Now I feel free to be able to tell other women. Maybe not every woman will listen to me, but some will. And I hope I can get one or two to save their own lives or save them from getting abused. And so that was in 2018. And then in 2021, when Phil Spector dies, she posts this like kind of unhinged like I mean, personally, I feel like it's a bit unhinged of an Instagram post, basically being like, meeting him and falling in love was like a fairy tale. The magical music we were able to make together was inspired by our love. I loved him madly and gave my heart and soul to him. And then she goes, he was a lousy husband. Unfortunately, Phil was not able to live and function outside of the recording studio. Darkness set in, many lives were damaged. But then she's like, I still smile whenever I hear the music we made together and always will. The music will be forever. And so it's like, it's so crazy that he's been in jail since 2009. Like, clearly she hasn't seen him for like over a decade. And yet she still has like, because I don't know what happened, like if they had seen each other or were involved in each other's lives at all post her escaping the mansion prison that he put her in. But it's just insane that she still has trouble sort of separating like that love and like the fact that he was literally insane and was abusing her in such a way. It's hard to fathom, but I guess like I've never been in that situation, so I don't know what it's like. But I feel like that just happens so often, where a lot of times these men sort of Stockholm syndrome these women so much that they just like don't really know how to cope with it after the fact.
Yeah, I mean, I have friends that have been in situations similar to that Stockholm syndrome, you know, just like mundane, dumb bullshit. So I can't even imagine if you were like in the studio watching this man create the most iconic Christmas song of all time, and you're like young, you know, like you must have some weird sort of fully romanticized version of like that part of your relationship, because I would imagine it was like the only positive thing they had together was like music, but it's still so weird.
And also like the fact that they were musicians, and we see this with Mandy Moore and Ryan Adams, of it's that thing of like the promise of like, well, this person is going to help me, like they're a genius, like they can get me with the right people, they have connections, or not even that. I mean, it seems like with Ronnie Spector, like she says like they were in love like through the music and everything, and like that's like the controlling factor of always like thinking like, oh, it'll get better, like this is gonna happen, you know, those promises that are like, you know, we'll release your record or whatever it is, and those never are followed through on. I think that's why those relationships are really hard to get out of.
And like, this is the real him. Like the him that's like psychotic isn't really him. Like when we get into the studio, it's like he's finally back, you know?
Yeah. Being held captive in a mansion is the perfect segue into Mariah Carey and Tommy Mottola.
Troy, do you want to give a bit of background about Mariah and Tommy for our listeners who might not know that much about how they came to be?
Yes. So they started dating in May of 1991. They were engaged in December of 92. And then they were married in June of the following year. And they ended up separating in 97. So that's like a really kind of short period of just like craziness. You know what I mean? Like met, immediately got engaged, had the craziest wedding at that point ever in pop culture. Just so much pomp and circumstance. You know what I mean? Like full Beauty and the Beast.
And Mariah was like 18 when they met?
Yeah, and she was basically forced into being the princess of his label. Like he was like, I will sign you, but you have to like be with me, pretty much. And she was just, I mean, held captive is like, it's like the understatement of the year. You know what I mean? Like it's hard to even describe. It's like Tommy Mottola had so much power that he was able to take it a step further and have men with snipers surrounding their house. And she knew when she would go places, she had an armed guard with a gun that was like not really meant for other people. Like she was held basically at gunpoint in their house. And she used to say like, I would carry my purse with me on my arm in her home, because she never knew when she, like some shit was going to pop off and she would like need her purse to like escape or climb a fence or dodge a bullet or something. Like really.
Oh my God. It sounds like a movie.
I literally put in my notes when I recorded that episode that she is fully Uma Thurman in Kill Bill. Like he's Bill.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Sick.
I have like chills just like talking about this.
The other things that also were like insane was like they got married and like she was not from like a very wealthy background or anything, and she had been like living in like a 1-bedroom apartment with like a bunch of friends like in the city to try and get her career off the ground and everything. And then once they get married, he's like, I'm gonna build you a mansion in like the countryside, like a bit outside of the city. And so she essentially was like building her own prison and like doing this whole thing. And then they move in and he like puts in all those those like motion sensor cameras, and like he's just always like aware whenever she's doing anything, and it's like, what were you doing? Why were you awake? Why were you doing this? Why were you doing that? And it's like, this man is like one of the most important men at Sony Music, and yet he's still like, I'm just trying to imagine like in like 1995 what sort of technology he had, that he's essentially carrying around a baby monitor of like Mariah Carey in their house. So because like that's basically what he was doing, is it's like this, like Mariah has said that she like wasn't even aware of how famous she was because he wasn't allowing her to be aware of it, where it just was like, okay, go in the studio, go to do this performance, go do this, go do that, and then go back to the house, because if you do anything without my permission, boom, boom, boom.
No, literally. And you know what's like, the weirdest thing about that is like he was so obsessive about crafting like her image, you know, like the Mariah image, the songbird. She wears the gowns and she's got an updo and she sings ballads, and like she's always very sort of conservative and very pretty and docile. Like he really had a strong idea of like what he wanted her to be, and she had to fully live his image of her even at home. So when she finally was able to like be free and dress sexy, and like the Honey video came out and it was like Mariah, you know, like a Manolo Blahnik stiletto, a slit up to her vagina, a tube top, a crazy side bang, people were like shaming her for it, not understanding that she had just been literally held at gunpoint for years in her marriage and wasn't allowed to wear shorts that were too short or whatever, you know?
Yeah. One of the crazy things about relationships like these, and I think even just pop stars or artists who get into the industry really young, is like the older people recognize talent in them and then they want to like control the whole image, because it's like they are young, they haven't really discovered themselves, they don't know what their brand is, and like these record execs are like, we're gonna make you, like we're gonna mold you into this perfect thing. It's honestly the perfect like controlling position of like, these older men have so much control, not just over like how they're marketed, but like literally shaping these people and controlling who they are as people, which is so unhealthy in any just like normal relationship. And then you throw in being the biggest pop star in the world, it like takes it to another level completely. And like the marriage thing on top of all that.
The other thing is that like Mariah basically sort of changed music forever, from just like her skill set as a singer. And like, this is the thing, is it's like she's like one of the first artists who was like, I want to sing pop music, I'm going to make my own music, I'm going to do all this thing. And she sort of created her own version of pop, because so many pop stars are sort of, even if they are like Britney, who like wanted to be a singer, it's like at the start of their career, like other people are writing their music, other people have a lot of hands in the pot, and Mariah's like, I want the least amount of hands in the pot. And because Tommy is so controlling, he's like, no, you can't only work with one producer. You need to work with multiple producers. Like, you can't get close to any other man except for me. And so there's this like extremely talented woman who's been singing since she could talk, essentially. And she's just, like, I like just thinking about Mariah's career, like she was at like the height of her career and is like, I'm gonna make an album of only Christmas songs. And it's still like one of her most popular albums, like essentially dubbing her the Queen of Christmas, you know? And yet this man is still like, I need to control you. And clearly she knows what she's doing and like has known what she's doing this whole time. And it's just like wild to me that she also would like hint at things when she would like accept awards and all of this stuff. And she was trying so hard. Looking back, like in hindsight, it's so clear that this woman was struggling, that like Mariah was like, help, I'm trapped, I'm like being held captive, please save me. And nobody was acknowledging it. And if they were acknowledging it, they were kind of just like, well, like he's Tommy Mottola, like what the fuck are we supposed to do about this?
Yeah, but like to the point that like her friends in the industry were calling her Rapunzel because they knew that she was literally trapped in a house. But I do think that you touch on a really interesting point though, that like I think that when it comes to Mariah and Tommy, it was almost worse for her because she's so talented. Like she's not talented in a way of like, I can sing, but I need your help with like the other stuff. Like Mariah actually has the ability to write an entire album, produce it herself, which is crazy, mix it, and then release it. Like she can do that. She really literally can do that with no problem at all. And she's been able to do it since before she even knew what she was doing. You know, like even when she wrote her first album, she was like, I could produce this. Like when she was in the studio the first time, she was like, oh, I could literally do this. So I feel like her being so talented made him more hovery, if that makes sense. Like it made his abuse even worse because it was like, I think he was threatened by how independent she could be if she had realized her power as a young person.
100%. I mean, in a lot of these articles that we were looking at for this episode, like they all sort of quote back to Tommy's memoir that he wrote in 2013 called Hitmaker, where he like admitted that, and I quote, the relationship was absolutely wrong and inappropriate. And yet he like still credits himself for her success, being like, if it seemed like I was controlling, I apologize. Was I obsessive? Yes. But that was also part of the reason for her success. And it's like, I just don't understand. In the memoir, he also said that his therapist actively told him not to pursue Carey, but he persisted. So I really want to know why this therapist was like, maybe don't do that. Because I mean, like, I understand why, because like she was so much younger, but like also at the same time, it's like, what does this therapist know about Tommy?
Yeah, what were your conversations like?
Let's have a therapist memoir over here.
Right.
So therapist tell all. With the live audience. Finally. I mean, we mentioned like he is older. I just want to point out he was like 21 years older than her when they got married. She was 23. He was 44. She said that you might want to picture a child bride of like literally her coming onto the scene and him just being like, you're mine now.
Yeah, here's your big, giant Steel Magnolia's wedding dress. This is the one. Get out there and like show him that you're my girl. Like, you know what I mean? Like, she was like a show pony. But I was going to say too, it's like when it comes to the Tommy and Mariah of it all, it's like the most interesting thing about it is that it became so much worse after they were divorced. You know, because he was still the fucking owner of her record label. She was divorced and contractually obligated to the man who she was married to that abused her. So like all of her music and all of the singles that she put out and all of her, you know, album imagery and anything that she released had to go through him. And I mean, he strategically it honestly just shows. His therapist honestly must have been like, you're literally fucking obsessed with her in a way that's sick. Like you obviously view her as like a doll or something, because the way that he just like meticulously over time drove her to insanity up to the point that when Glitter came out, it was like she'd hit a wall and, you know, and then he had discovered Jennifer Lopez and was like, you know, this girl would make a really good like chew toy for Mariah. So I'm gonna just dangle her in front of Mariah for years and drive her fucking crazy and not even make Jennifer sing her own songs. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm literally just going to use this girl as a toy. And it worked. And that's the fucked up thing, is that it worked.
And the other fucked up thing with that is that Jennifer Lopez was like a Mariah Carey fan. And like looked up to her, probably was like, oh, it'll be so cool. We're both signed to Sony. She could be my mentor. Like, how awesome this is going to be. Like, I'll get to work with Mariah. Yeah. And meanwhile, Tommy's like, no, the whole reason why I've signed you is because you guys have similar skin tone. Nobody knows what ethnicity either of you are. And so it's going to piss her off that you're getting famous. And also because I work with her and because like I know people that work with her, I like know what she's sampling. I know who she's working with. So like, I'm going to try and get us those features before she gets those features out, and like I'm gonna try and get those samples and like see if I can like push out our singles with those samples out before hers come. And like it's just like so deranged what he was doing. And it's like, I'm not saying that Glitter was like a work of art that like should that like should be like amazing.
Well, we're not saying that.
We're not saying it, because everything Mariah does is a work of art. But I mean, like, that should have been respected more than it was. But because of all the drama that was going on, it made it even more like, what the fuck is Mariah doing, making a movie and a soundtrack basically about herself, but not about herself, because everybody just turned it into this thing of like, instead of just her being Mariah, it was like, oh, Mariah's trying to stick it to the man and like shove it in J-Lo's face. And it's like, who is J-Lo? Like at that point in time, like who was she? Like no one. She was like Tommy Mottola's like pawn in a scheme to like ruin Mariah's whole life, basically, which is fucked up.
Yeah. And like, I mean, I agree with you. Like when we look back on Glitter, it's like, LOL, you know what I mean? But like, she also, it's like what she had her finger on the pulse of was like ended up, I mean, she predicted the 80s comeback. Like Mariah predicted that in the early 2000s, like the 80s would eventually come back. And people thought she was fucking crazy that she released an 80s inspired album. They were like, she's literally losing her mind. And then everybody started making music like that, including Jennifer Lopez. It's so crazy.
Well, I think also people just gave her a hard time because along with the album, like a movie came out that people were like, what?
Right. Yeah.
But I think after having like 5 years of no freedom, like I would go make a wild movie too. Like, why not? Like, finally you're in control of like the way you dress, the way you look, and you're like, you know what? Let's also make a blockbuster film because why the hell not?
Yeah, like I don't think people take into account, like even when she was going through all of that weird time publicly where she was exhausted and not, being allowed to sleep and working all the time and stuff. She also was going through a weird delayed adolescence. Like she was basically like a 17-year-old in an adult woman's body. Like she'd not been allowed to make her own decisions for so long. So that was like her weird bangers era. You know what I mean? Like honestly, it was like her weird, like I'm coming out phase. Like I'm an adult now, but like
it's so true though. I feel like every pop star who like winds up coming back out on top in the grand scheme of things has that sort of, I'm just gonna like go balls to the wall crazy for like this time period, but then when you look back you're like, oh, a year or two later everybody's sort of doing that exact same thing. Like you were just ahead of the curve. So
totally. And it's always like a bit cringe to look back on, right? Like,
yeah,
like Dirty is a bit cringe for Christina. It's a bit cringe, but it's like the nostalgia of it's fun too.
You had to go through it to get through today.
So exactly.
But also when you look back on it, it's never as bad as like the world tried to make it seem like it was when it was happening.
Oh my God, it's so true. Like when you look back on Miley at the VMAs, the outrage that people had is so like, it's compared to like what we deal with now. It's like, girl, really? The foam hand really sent you into a complete spiral? You know what I mean? Like, was it that big of a deal?
I guess like the one thing that does still to this day upset me about the whole Mariah Carey thing is that she's still to some people like a butt of a joke. And I'm like, why is her talent put to the side so much because of this persona that essentially like she created to deal with trauma that everybody is aware of? It's like, I know Mariah's book only came out recently, but I mean, it was in the media. It was like public knowledge what she went through. And yet people are still like, why is she still trying? Like, why is she still doing this? And it's like, because the first like 6 years of her fame, she wasn't allowed to enjoy it, and now she's celebrated as like the icon that she so truly is, and she's older and she's been through a lot, so of course like maybe her voice can't go as high or do whatever, but she's still gonna try because she's like, I'm finally allowed to enjoy this, like let me have my fucking moment, and nobody lets her have it, and it just makes me so mad.
Yeah, she's like a walking meme. It's so disrespectful, but it also is it's just how our society treats women that are like at that level in media, Like we literally cannot fully view them as human beings. Like we can't get there.
So basically because of Mariah Carey going through this in like the 90s and sort of the end of the 90s when tabloids start happening and like there's more intrigue into like celebrity stuff, I feel like she wasn't allowed the quick redemption that other people have been so nicely allowed now. Because in the case of like Mandy Moore and Ryan Adams, Mandy Moore started her career when she was like 14 years old. Candy came out in 1999, so she was like 15. She was touring with like NSYNC, Backstreet Boys. She was having success as a pop star at such a young age, and then she started doing acting. She was in The Princess Diaries and A Walk to Remember, and basically doing everything because she's a triple threat, an icon, if I dare say so myself. Her career was going in the trajectory of being successful in every aspect. Everything she did was celebrated to some extent. She could play like the mean girl, she could play the good girl, she could literally do anything, and also sing. And then she meets Ryan Adams, who is like a sad boy, indie icon, what have you, whatever you want to call him. And it's kind of like infatuation, love at first sight, from what it sounds like listening to Mandy talk about when they first met, that he was living in New York, she was living in LA, and they were still like, we're gonna make this work, like this is gonna happen. They got married in 2009 and they were married until 2015. And she said that like the first 3 years of their marriage were pretty successful, pretty good. But also right when they got married, or like right before they got married, Mandy Moore found out that her mother was cheating on her father with another woman. So there was this whole like familial drama where like they had a really close family and they were on family vacation, and Mandy goes on a computer, finds like a note that her mom wrote that like she was planning to give to them to like essentially break the ice on what was going on. And so Mandy Moore has this knowledge in her head that like her mom is like gonna leave her dad for a woman, and that they've been having this like secret affair for a while, and she tells her brother. They try and figure out what to do about it, and he's like, I think dad knows, let's not ruin this vacation, let us have this vacation. But also at this time, like, she'd just been in a movie with Robin Williams, she'd been in a movie with Diane Keaton, like her career was sort of like about to explode, and at the same time her family life is about to explode, and then she's also about to meet Ryan Adams, or maybe had just met him. Like, I'm not like, the facts there about when they first met are kind of hazy for me. But yeah, so then she has this whole thing where then she meets this like sad boy, down on his luck, like artist who's like not really down on his luck because his career is doing really well. And they get involved, and she's kind of like, oh, I'm going to fix him. And so that's sort of what happens is like the first year of their marriage, Tangled comes out, but she had just worked on that. So she like is the voice of Rapunzel, and then she sort of just takes a step back. And that's when everything sort of happens.
Oh, it makes my stomach hurt. Like, I hate it. I hate it so much. So I'm a real Mandy stan. Like, I love me some Mandy. Her voice is the true definition of angelic, I believe. And I just like, I already think that she has, I think all the pop girls have an interesting like Marvel universe story. Like, you know, they all have an interesting, like, I snuck into the back room of the Mickey Mouse Club and I handed them my audition tape or whatever, like the whole thing. But I think Mandy's is honestly like one of the most interesting because it's like she just had everything working against her from the very start. And if she didn't look the way she looked, like, she wouldn't have had to sing Candy, which she never wanted to do, you know? And like, she was just pushed into such an unfair position of like not being Britney, not being Christina, not being Jessica. Literally her career was based on not being them. Mm-hmm. And like, that sucks, you know? And she really had to kind of wedge her way into the industry basically forcefully because nobody was like respecting Mandy Moore. She had to like earn it. And, you know, she fought and worked so hard. And it's just so sad that like, as she was about to like really figure out like who she even was, because she had like found out that she could act and she was like, oh, I'm like a good actor. Like, okay. So I'm going to keep doing it. And her movies were doing really well. And like, that became a whole thing for her. And then she met him and he was like, I want you to not learn how to, like, you're not going to learn how to play instruments. You will not learn how to read music. So don't even try, you know what I mean? And like, whatever, you know, writing you're doing or whatever, like, basically consider it done. We're going to put the kibosh on your creative journey. You know what I mean? Like, he just took so much away from her.
That's the other thing is it's like in 2009, like the year that they got married, she released that album Amanda Lee, which she says is like the first album that she felt like she was actually making music for herself and what she wanted to be making. And she was working with artists that she respected, and it wasn't put out on a major label, so it wasn't really promoted that well. Like, she went on a couple talk shows to talk about it or whatever, but she finally like was finding her footing in acting, finding her footing in her music. And Ryan Adams is like, hey, I know that your family life just imploded, but my family life hasn't been imploded this whole time, and so I need you to be both my wife and my mom and take care of me. And like, anytime you leave the house, I'm going to go into a tailspin. But if I leave the house to go on tour, that's fine. But like, I need to know that you're in this house, making sure that the house looks exactly the same when I come home.
Like, what the fuck?
I mean, it's the exact same thing we just saw with Mariah and with Ronnie Spector. It's insane how history repeats itself. Or rather, this bad behavior continues to exist.
And he also, because like, he is nowhere near as like powerful as Tommy or Phil, but he did have like these connections in that world that it felt like Mandy was sort of gravitating towards, wanting to move her music towards, because people were starting to respect her. So she was like, I don't need to be this bubblegum pop person anymore. I can do what I want. And he kept sort of like dangling this idea of like collaborating together on an album in front of her. And so, I mean, in any relationship, even if it is because like emotional abuse is so hard to acknowledge that it's happening, especially if you're like not that super emotionally stable yourself at that moment in time. So you just don't really know. You sort of just get used to it and you're like, oh, we're in the honeymoon phase of our relationship. This is what I want to do. And like Mandy Moore guested on the What the Fuck podcast with Mark Maron in 2019. And this was like the first time she ever publicly talked about her relationship with Ryan Adams. And it was really just like heart-wrenching to listen to, because it felt like in the same situation where like people knew Tommy was a bad guy, people knew that Phil Spector was a bad guy, it felt like Mark knew. And like I don't know what his relationship is with Mandy, so I don't know, but it kind of felt like they were just sort of aware of each other, maybe friendly, but like not good friends, just based off of the rapport that they were having in this podcast. And so that made it even more just kind of like hair standing up sort of situation of like the way he's talking, it felt like people just knew that Ryan was kind of fucked up. And I just had pulled some things that she said where she was saying how she was living her life for him. She goes, I had no sense of self. I was imperceptible. I was so small in my own world. And so she just kept saying how like it was like an inherently unhealthy relationship, and how him needing her made her feel worthy. It made her feel like she had value, and just like that there was somebody that she could take care of. And because she also felt like she was undeserving of her success, and because of that she felt like it was okay to not live for herself for once, and how he needed her to give him this normal life that he never had. And it sort of felt like because she was allowed to put back together his pieces, it was helping her not really have to deal with what was going on with her own family. And it's just so depressing that this like incredibly talented woman felt like her success wasn't deserved for some reason, which I don't understand at all. Because like, I mean, this was the craziest thing when I was on Wikipedia, was like a FedEx delivery man who was friends with an A&R rep at Epic Records discovered her while she was like hanging out at like a studio in Orlando, which like, of course it was Orlando because that's where every nefarious pop thing ever starts happening. But yeah, so it's just like wild that this girl was just discovered because she was talented by just somebody who knew someone, and she's still like, oh, I was undeserving of this fame, so like I essentially deserve to take a step back to like take care of this man child that I was married to.
Yeah, and like I guess it kind of makes sense when you think about it. Like Mandy's music career is like the saddest thing in the world to me, because like I said earlier, she never really was able to kind of figure out what she wanted to do. And like when, like you said, when she started to, that like the rug basically got pulled from under her. But she's always had this weird sort of like, I almost feel like it's like a traumatic relationship with her old music. And then she was like dating Wilmer Valderrama, and she was underage, and you know, it was just such like a traumatic time, I feel, for her. And like her sexuality was becoming a thing as like a 16-year-old, because she was being compared to Britney, and like, how sexy are you gonna be, you know, like the whole thing. So I feel like her attachment to her own music is already just like so dark and so sad. And like, you know, she's just never really been given the opportunity to figure out like who she is. So then it's like, of course he played on that, you know, like he knew that she was insecure about that stuff, and that she didn't feel like she was a real artist, and she has no personal respect for the music that she used to do. So obviously when she's dating Ryan Adams, who has like a cult following of all these cool bros or whatever, it's just such a recipe for disaster.
I was trying to make this point earlier a little bit, but it's like people like Ryan Adams like need someone like that to like latch onto and feed off of and really control. And maybe it's because he feel like he hasn't been in control of anything in his life that he needs to control someone else. But I think people like him are quick to find people like Mandy who need someone to like tell them or like validate them or whatever it is. They're quick to latch on to like those types of relationships.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
And I think that that's proven even more so with the fact that like Mandy Moore said that it took like half a year basically for everything to just like stop happening, where she like filed divorce papers, and that there was just like this back and forth conversation, like this constant thing of her feeling the need to like become a fighter, where she like hated confrontation, and yet she like lived with this like confrontational figure who kept being like, don't leave me, don't do this. But while that's all happening, he is doing the same thing to Phoebe Bridgers at the beginning of her career. And it's just like this horrifying cycle that is just shocking, because there was this New York Times expose that came out around the same time that Mandy talked on Mark's podcast, and it was talking about how he was not only doing this to fellow women who were on the way to success, but women like fans who he'd be like, oh, like I can mentor you, and he would do the same thing of being like, look at all these connections I have, and then would sort of like love bomb them over text and be like, you're all I want, I need you to do this, and this for me, or else like I'm never gonna give you this like that you want. And he was doing this to Phoebe, where like he met Phoebe at like a party, very similar to the Tommy Mariah situation, where he's like, oh, you have so much talent, like I'm gonna mold you, I'm gonna work with you. And then he brings her into the studio. I think he brought her on tour, and he was promising her all these things, but then he's like, send me nudes. Like
literally
just like harassing her. And she said in this New York Times thing where she basically was saying that within a week of them working together, he was saying how like, oh, we should get married, and like you have to come on tour with me. And he like told her mom that this was like a once in a lifetime opportunity, and that he was going to be looking out for her and all this stuff. And whenever she'd be like, try and step back, he'd be like, I'm going to kill myself if you're not there for me. And it's just like this horribly emotionally manipulative, abusive relationship while he's like trying to convince Mandy Moore not to leave him. And the control of these women is like slowly leaving him. And it's just so horrifying to think of how many other men are probably doing this, like in music and just in other realms of celebritydom, and that it takes so much more than just one voice. Because like I would think like Mandy Moore, like people trust her, she's like one of America's multiple sweethearts. You would think that if she came forward, people would be like, fuck this man, Mandy deserves everything. But that's unfortunately not the case. Is it's like women are so often like not believed, because it's like that man would never. And so you need so many voices to just make one loud voice. It's like, it's so frustrating.
Like Ryan is such a good example of, like you said earlier, like you don't even have to be like on the Tommy Mottola level of success to get totally like warped in this weird world where like you are put on a pedestal, people throw themselves at you, you have access to young girls all the time, like a fucking buffet, and like you need constant validation all the time, and it creates this like monster. But then at the same time, you are like extremely insecure because you need validation every single second of the day, you know? So like you're so deranged that you put all of that onto like a 17-year-old girl, and you're some grown-ass fucking man, you know what I mean? And you're like literally looking for a kid to like validate you all day long, and they're your like play toy.
I mean, not a romantic relationship, but that's exactly what we saw with Lou Pearlman and NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, what you just described.
Yeah, totally, 1000%. The insecurity jumped out, and then it was like, oh, and now you're rich, great.
This pattern is just repeated in so many different ways, and it's so depressing and just like horrifying. And I mean, the other thing that's just so frustrating is that like Ryan Adams, throughout his 6-year like marriage to Mandy Moore, he kept being like, oh, your 7th album, it's going to be us collaborating together, we're going to be working together. And then that never happened, and yet he collaborated with her on a singular song for one of his albums. It's just so frustrating imagining my like imagination of like them being in this relationship and her being like, yeah, babe, like my like 6th album, like I really love that sound and it's similar to like what you do, and like maybe we could work together. Like she just wanted to do something kind of like indie, and he was like, yeah, I do indie, we'll do indie together. And it just like didn't happen in the way that she wanted to. And I mean, so she had Amanda Lee that came out in 2009, and then she didn't have anything come out until 2020, once she's like free of him, has a new husband, started a new life essentially, where she's acting again, doing all this stuff again. And I mean, at least she came out properly on top, unlike Mariah, who Mariah sort of became a joke to a lot of people. I think that in some ways people are more keen to like believe women and like trust them, where like nowadays, I mean, women are screwing.
I think it has to do with the time that it came out. It came out in 2019, when we're taking this stuff a lot more seriously.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that she was very lucky in that sense that all of this sort of happened in this quote unquote new world. I mean, women are still treated like shit, but at least they're believed more and there's more of an opportunity to sort of actually come out on top. Because I mean, like 6 months after she finally left Ryan Adams, This Is Us starts filming and her career sort of goes up from there because she starts doing films again, she starts voice acting again, she starts singing again, she gets into a much healthier relationship. And so she was given the opportunity to sort of like redeem herself in her own way and how she wanted to. But I think also because she wasn't really doing anything while she was with Ryan, it kind of was like, oh, remember Mandy Moore? Which I think is also kind of like sinister and fucked up in a way, because it's like, remember Mandy Moore? And it's like, she's still around, like she's still here. We don't hear from her for a reason. Maybe let's go check up on Mandy Moore.
No, it's like, first of all, that's such a good point that like, yeah, she didn't go anywhere. She just was like waiting to see what the next thing is that she would be allowed to do. But so I reviewed A Walk to Remember with my friend Hannah Brown, and I went into it just being like, oh, this will be fun. Like A Walk to Remember, silly, fun, you know, like MTV sponsored movie or whatever. And as I was watching it, I was like, holy shit. Like, I just didn't really take into account the fact that Mandy doing that movie on a whim, just being like, I guess I could like try to do a movie, basically set her up for the rest of her life. Like, had she not done that, you know, sort of cheesy teen love film, her whole life would be different. Like, who knows if we would even have seen her in the last 10 years, you know what I mean? Because she unlocked like acting Mandy Moore, you know, thank God.
And it's like kind of sad that Mandy is one of the few proper redemptions that we've seen of like a woman being able to like come out with her story on her own terms, sort of, but it's after her career has restarted already. So it's like she didn't have to come out with her story in order for her career to do well. It was like her career, like she left a abusive marriage, quickly thereafter her career picks up again, and then once she's back in the spotlight, it's like, oh hey, now I can talk about my trauma, which I think is really healthy and pretty incredible. And then we have Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake, and that's just a whole other thing of like, in their relationship, Britney is more successful than Justin. Justin is 1 out of 5 in a boy band, and then this all happens. So Jenna, do you want to give us a brief history of Justin and Britney and Justin?
Well, I was gonna say I can give a brief history, and then Troy, if you need to fact check me or expand on anything, feel free to do so. So Justin and Britney started dating around 1999. I think it was confirmed more like 2000. They got really serious really quickly. So if you're not familiar, they were on the Mickey Mouse Club together when they were young teens. And so now that Britney's Britney and Justin's in NSYNC, their circles have collided again. And so they get into this relationship and it gets really serious. They were together until 2002, but they like were living together and they were engaged. I didn't even know that. Like, I'm new to the whole Justin Britney backstory here. So there's that. And then allegedly they broke up because of an alleged affair with Britney and her choreographer, Wade Robinson. And then Justin kind of like is the first one out of the gate to like run with the narrative of I've been wronged, I'm heartbroken, poor me, and Cry Me a River. That's like one of his first singles right out the gate. He's working on the Justified album, and he essentially runs with the narrative of being the victim here. And he does interviews with like Barbara Walters, who's like totally being wooed by him. And then suddenly Britney is the bad person in this story, and she's on Diane Sawyer, and Diane Sawyer is absolutely grilling her and like, what did you do to Justin? Like, how dare you? Like, our favorite pop star, when like Britney was essentially more famous than Justin until their breakup, and then you start to see his career also rising.
Yeah, I mean, the Britney and Justin, I think, is an important one to throw in the mix, just because all of those other relationships weren't put on the same sort of like Britney and Justin was big business, you know? Mm-hmm. Like, sometimes that comes into play where it's like, oh, like our relationship has turned into its own organism, where now like there are literally businesses surrounding our relationship. There are negotiations, contracts, commercials, sponsors, you know, just based on us dating. So like that's a huge thing to factor into just how weird that would be to be, you know, a teenager and your first like real relationship.
It's like Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson with Twilight.
Like, very that.
Yeah.
Like, we have a multi-billion-dollar industry surrounding us dating.
Yeah.
And we're kids, you know, it's fucking weird. And I always say that Justin was like he was like the male Taylor Swift for a while because he was so good at like narrate, like, you know, controlling his narrative and controlling his story and the media perception of him. Like he was so strategic and puppeteering, you know, but he just like created an image for himself of like a sad boy genius, like a musical prodigy, heartbroken, gorgeous, sad boy.
So the thing that's so interesting about Justin Timberlake is that like he was a pageant kid because his mom is like, oh, my son's cute. And so she like puts him in like a sexy kid cowboy outfit and like parading him around the South. And the thing with Justin is it's like, it's not that he is a talented man, but like JC Chasez should have been the lead singer of NSYNC. But it's because Justin has that like
the charisma.
He has an artificial charm that is really good for the industry, you know?
Yeah, it's very just like conservative America, like blue-eyed, like mama's boy sort of image that everybody sort of loves to see. And it also doesn't help that like when he and Britney break up, he's like doing the like press circuit with his mom for some reason, which I'm like, okay, this is a fucking weird narrative, but you do you, dude.
Because he had to be the mama's boy and he had to be the good boy and Britney
like,
had to be the bad one.
And this is the funny thing is it's like when you think about One Direction and how we've talked about like how Zayn was given this bad boy image, and then when he went solo, everybody's like the bad boy from One Direction, and so Zayn's like, oh whatever, I'll just like lean into this, I like smoking weed, but he just did it himself where he just was like, oh, like I'm just gonna talk about weed and people are gonna keep being like the bad boy, whereas like Justin Timberlake, instead of being like, I'll just talk about my mom, he's like, I'm gonna bring my mom with me. And like, it's just so weird. But I think the other thing is that the narrative surrounding Britney Spears throughout her career was always the corny yet virginal thing. And it was that Britney wanted to sort of be sexy, but she also was like young and like shouldn't be. So her label was kind of like, this is the image we want you to have. Because I just feel like the Britney that like she is and the Britney that like we were fed were two completely different things, where I think Britney was very just like middle of the road, kind of like, maybe I'll sneak out from the house, maybe I won't, but like I'm not going to be too bad, just sort of like a straight B student of like who she was as a person. Whereas the media was kind of giving us this like the good girl gone bad idea of Britney. And so it was like overly sexualizing her while also sort of just dressing her in like too small clothes. So it's like she's dressed like a young person, but like, oh, if she moves her arm the wrong way, you'll see some cleavage.
Right. Yeah.
And so because we were fed this, it kind of felt like Justin was like, because obviously like we don't know, it's never been confirmed whether or not Britney actually like cheated on him, but it felt like Justin, when they broke up, was kind of like, oh, Britney was his meal ticket in a way, because he was just that ex-boy band guy. And like, I feel like if he and Britney hadn't been together, it would be very likely that his career just would have disappeared. Like it just would have dissipated post NSYNC, because I don't think there would have been as much intrigue or interest in his first album, because like, I don't think he is that exciting. But like, I don't know, because we don't know what the alternate timeline is where he didn't date Britney. So we don't know if there's something where it's like, oh, it's just Justin trying. And so then to come out with the album that sort of like sets the precedent for every ex-boy bander, every ex like teen pop star to like have a justified album that they come out with that's like, oh yeah, I fuck. Like him to come out with that and it to be half like, oh, I fuck, and like, oh, maybe it was Britney I was fucking, is just horrendous.
It's so gross. It's so like surface level misogynistic too, that it's crazy that it took people, especially older people. Like I was at least we were kids. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at people that were like full-blown adults at the time being like, literally, what were you thinking? Like, what was running through your head when this was going on? Like, I know that we're like woke now, but like, I really truly don't get it. Like, I don't understand. But no, I agree with you. I think like the way that Britney, I guess the answers that she had to give as far as like her body changing and what she was wearing and how she danced and all that stuff, and like the way that she was marketed in comparison to like the way that they were marketed and what they had to answer to was just so wild. Like nobody nobody gave a fuck that NSYNC, first of all, as gross as it is, you have to factor in that they were being marketed by Lou Pearlman.
Mm-hmm.
So they were being marketed by a man who was lusting after them in a sexual way. So they looked like fucking European gay porn stars all the time. I mean, let's just, you know what I mean?
Not mad about it.
It is what it is. They looked like 90s European, like Euro trash porn stars in like mesh tops and chokers and cow print chaps, like sucking lollipops. You know what I mean? Like that was NSYNC basically. And nobody cared that they were like thrusting their like crotches at the fucking teenage girls in their shows. And like, you know, it was wild, like simulating sex on stage. And like Britney would wear a baseball t-shirt with it tied in a knot, and it was like on the New York Times the next day, you know? So like right out of the gate, it was just such an unfair bias. And I feel like Justin knew that. Like he knew that it would be so easy for him to control the narrative, and that for her it would be a never ending uphill battle, and that she would never ever be in the good graces of the world the way that he was. Like, it was so easy for him. That's like what makes it more annoying.
I think that's a good point, that it was easy for him, of being like, to Sarah's point, like he maybe isn't actually that interesting. It's just like he had an easy time because he's like the all-American blue-eyed boy, and there was not a lot of barriers for him. I think that definitely plays into it. But also we found this 2017 interview with the music video director who made Cry Me a River. And I actually thought it was pretty fascinating. So I wanted to read some quotes from here. Like the music video director straight up says, like, the music video for Cry Me a River, where he's essentially like stalking his ex, which like is supposed to be Britney lookalike, like in her house. And it's very creepy. Like the director of this video says, one of the things I really liked is it doesn't paint Justin in the best light, you know? And he's like, this is after, like, this is him, his first solo thing, trying to break away from NSYNC, trying to, like, stand out. And, like, the fact that this music video was actually kind of, like, disturbing, but, like, it was such a hit, I think says a lot also to the fact that it was relatively easy for Justin.
Yeah, the misinterpretation of that too is crazy, because I don't think many people, even though like you said, it is so clear that in the video he's stalking her, he's like lurking in the bushes in front of her house and watching her through the windows and shit, and people were like, he's heartbroken. But then when Every Time came out, they were like, well, she's still a crazy whore, and that sucks. You know what I mean? This like apology for how much I've hurt you, and like an admission of whatever fault I have, and like I just felt at a point in my life that I needed you to survive, was totally misinterpreted. And then his like peeping Tom story, people were like, it's just like, so like, I don't get it. I can't wrap my head around it. Like I don't understand the logistics. You know what I mean?
It's just like so crazy that Britney could release like this gorgeous song, like an absolutely beautiful song about what happened, and just people would be just like rip her apart. They just like ripped her apart whenever they possibly could, and then they're like, why is she having a breakdown? Like, why is she dating her trailer trash backup dancer? And it's like, I don't know. Why not?
Look at the fucking
mirror.
Like, why not at a certain point be like, you know what, fuck it, if you guys are gonna like make fun of the way that I look and make fun of my family and like judge everything about me, then yeah, I'm gonna stop at a fucking BP with no shoes on.
Yeah,
I don't give
like, I'm gonna be as Louisiana as I fucking want to, and you're just gonna deal with it.
Right, like I can't win anyway, so it's like I'm gonna go to BP with no shoes, and like I'm hooking up with this fucking hot backup dancer from Fresno, and I'm like kind of loving it. So you know what I mean? It's like, it makes complete sense looking back.
It's just heartbreaking that Justin Timberlake got away with this for so long, and that so many people were just like celebrating his career and like allowing him to make this like mediocre music and just celebrate it, when everything he's doing is on the back of Britney, and like literally on the back of Britney. Because there have been situations, Calvin Harris and Taylor Swift, where like Calvin Harris was like moderately successful. He dates Taylor Swift. He starts getting bigger artists featured on his music. He sort of like used her as like a climbing point, but I don't think he got into the relationship for that. Whereas Britney had a crush on Justin the whole time, like since they were children. It kind of feels like Justin, yes, I'm sure he loved her, but I think also he just saw it as like, okay, like my whole life has been my mom using me to get money and success, and then Lou Pearlman using me to get money and success. Ooh. So now maybe I'm gonna use Britney for money and success. Ooh. Like, even though like, yeah, like I'm sure he actually liked her, but you know, like I'm sure that there were ulterior motives there. And then instead of doing what Calvin Harris did, which was kind of like step on Taylor's back and hop off it, Justin was like, oh no, I'm gonna keep jumping down on Britney's back until Britney is no longer and I am in control, and now I have an anti-vax wife that I cheat on in public and nobody cares. And it's like, Justin Timberlake's never done anything right, like genuinely, like everything he's done career-wise has been quote unquote right, but that's like viewing his career as like a businessman. But it's like everything he's done in his career has also involved real people with thoughts and feelings, like emotions, and he's just sort of like left them in his wake to like be in bad movies and like do dumb shit. And I'm like, dude, sorry, I have so much pent up anger about just.
I'm floating off the ground right now. I feel like this is like my wedding day. I'm not even kidding. This is the happiest day of my life. I'm not kidding. Like, keep going.
Well, I would love to talk about the 2004 Janet Jackson Super Bowl event, also known as Nipplegate. Because so it's really funny, like this whole conversation is relatively new in my like realization of Justin Timberlake being a bad man, because I was just like, he was just like a pop star figure. I was too young, honestly. I was like 5 in 2000 when like Britney and Justin were dating, so I didn't like, wasn't aware. Yeah, exactly. And so the Super Bowl performance, I just think it's really funny that Justin literally rips open like Janet Jackson's corset or whatever you want to call it, exposing her breast. And then like Justin immediately like removes himself from the situation in the media, and everything just comes falling down on Janet Jackson. Like I was reading this on Wikipedia, like the Super Bowl and the MTV was like part of the Super Bowl halftime performance. They got rid of MTV and then they like banned Janet Jackson from ever being played on air again.
I just feel like Justin Timberlake did like the Taylor Swift notes thing of like, I did not ask to be part of this narrative and I would like to be excluded from it.
Even though he literally perpetrated the action, like he physically is the one who even like whether or not this was planned ahead of time, he like physically is the one who like exposed her breast, and then like he doesn't get any downfall out of this. Where MTV literally blacklisted Janet Jackson singles and music videos from radio and music channels worldwide.
And she wasn't allowed to go to the Grammys that year or anything. But the thing is that I'm like, from my perspective at least, it looked like the plan was for him to rip it off and reveal her bra because of the lyric of the song, and that something malfunctioned, or he just like ripped too hard. I don't know. It's hard to believe that Justin Timberlake could rip too hard, but it's just insane that like my mindset would have been like, okay, these teams clearly had to collaborate together to make this happen. Like, why can't these teams collaborate together to do a joint like press briefing of them together being like, this was what our plan was, it worked out wrong, like I'm so sorry that this happened. They could have tag teamed it, dealt with it together, come out strong together. Because like if I was like their fixer or whatever, I'd be like, okay, this is our plan, you're gonna tackle this together, then we're gonna release a like single together so that you guys are stuck together to deal with this shit and like have to go on like a redemption tour together. And it's just, I don't know, and it's just frustrating because I feel like at every aspect of Justin's career he's like fucked up some woman's life in some way and nobody's acknowledged it.
Well, it's like in ways that are like mind-blowing. MTV is a network that Janet Jackson basically built. Like Janet Jackson herself was like as far as the level of pop culture that she was putting out, she's just like the Black Madonna. Like she was like the person that people looked to for like innovative, like what are we doing next? Like what are music videos gonna look like? What is music gonna sound like? Janet was like on another level. And for him to have like erased her legacy in that way is so psychotic to me. That's Janet Jackson. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, again, that's the thing that my mind I can't like comprehend people's thought process at the time of being like, oh, well, she was like truly the first person to really get canceled. Like what it really means to be canceled, like we're just going to erase your entire music career for some shit that we don't even really know. Like who, like, and like, that was the other thing is like the world was so unclear on like what really happened. So to immediately just blame her without anybody even having a full grasp of like what went on. And yeah, they were supposed to rip off the patent leather part of that corset, and then there was like a red fabric underneath, and he ripped off all of the fabric, and like she's standing there with her whole tit out on the Super Bowl, and then she got burned like a Salem witch the next day, and he was like yep. Like, I don't understand.
The thing is, it's like when you think about it, if you like don't take everything that Justin's ever done into account, it's shocking. But at the same time, I mean, after the Justin Britney breakup, like he was going on the radio being asked if like he took Britney Spears' virginity, and he's like, yeah, I smacked that. And it's like, Justin, like that's number one, that's disgusting. Number two, you could only have gotten away with that in that specific exact year. Fuck off. And it's just like, I don't know, it's just so annoying because like I feel like it's so important for people to like look back on Britney's career as like the success that it was, because I feel like so many people just still have this idea of Britney, of her being like essentially captive in her own home. Like she can't really do anything, she can't really see her kids, she can't put out like she doesn't want to put out music anymore or do her stuff because she has no control over it. And at that point in her career, she was like finding her footing. She was starting to write her own songs, she was starting to really become like an artist, essentially following in Mariah Carey's footsteps, like of just like creating her own sounds with her voice, creating her own music and all that sort of stuff. And then the world is just like, but she cheated on Justin Timberlake. And it's like, why do we love Justin Timberlake all of a sudden when like Britney Spears was like the face of Got Milk and Skechers and like every possible thing that any girl ever wanted for like 4 years, like probably more than that. And then all of a sudden, oh no, she hurt Justin Timberlake and now everybody hates her. And then her career sort of goes into this like completely other dimension of like her just being like overtly sexual, like over the top with all of that, because it felt like, okay, well, if this is what the world wants, then this is what the world gets. And then you have like the I'm a Slave for You video and all these things coming out. And it's just like, it's so upsetting that it kind of felt like before that she was trying to grab some control of her career. And then she was like, you know, like, okay, if this is what the label wants and this is what the world wants, I'm just gonna go along with it. And it just like looking back, it just feels like a trapped woman being forced to like be sexy because Justin Timberlake's made you out to be a harlot, so now you're a harlot, sweetie.
I always say that I think, especially now with like post the documentary, I think because Britney Spears was introduced to the world as somebody that people weren't necessarily supposed to respect, like it's taken a lot of people this whole time to realize the actual magnitude of how big her career was, that she was like in hindsight on the level of like a Madonna, Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey. Like she was like up there. She wasn't like as much as they've been compared, like she wasn't like a Christina or a Jessica, not at the end. Like at the end of the at Britney's peak, she was a Michael. You know what I mean? She was like a legacy artist, if that makes sense. So it's like, I think it's taken people a long time to realize like how famous she actually was, and what obviously it's like what she's gone through is insane. And I'm not trying to compare the two, but like what as a society we missed out on culture-wise because that was taken from the world. Like we'll never know. Like I always say, when Britney released In the Zone, which a lot of people say is like, you know, her best album or whatever, and it's like her most like artistic, you know, free, working with like Moby and like being artsy fartsy, as she would put it. She like, you know, then she got pregnant and like she wanted to release like her version of like a Ray of Light, like Madonna's Ray of Light, like a pregnant woman who is now married and like she has all these thoughts and feelings about being an adult and being a mom and like all this stuff, and like that was taken from her and from the world, you know, like because of him. like he took two legacy artists' careers away from them. That's crazy.
It is crazy, and it is also crazy that it's taken until 2021 for him to publicly acknowledge that.
Well, through a fucking notes app. If you remove Janet from it, you're apologizing to a person that you've known since you were like fucking 7 years old, basically. You've known this person your entire life. You guys have a history together that is so insane. You literally created a chapter in pop culture together. Like you created a chapter together and you're apologizing in 5 sentences in a notes app. Like, don't bother, please. Like, just fuck off.
Yeah, I think so. The Framing Britney doc came out, and then I mean, it was just days after. I don't even know if it was a full week after he comes out with the apology, and it's.
Yeah, I think it was like 2 days.
Yeah, it was quick, and I mean, it's very like, okay, clearly a PR person wrote this, like because it's
right.
like, it hits all the points it needs to hit. But I think because it was so soon, so immediate after the doc, people were still so outraged that by the time he put it out, it was just like, how dare you? Like, how dare you do this, what feels like a half-ass apology when we're still like essentially grieving Britney's career? I just think the immediacy of it, even though it was 20 years after the fact, but because the documentary was so fresh in everyone's minds, it was just like, it felt wrong. Like his apology felt just fake.
It was just him again being like, oh no, my foot's still on Britney's neck.
Yeah.
gotta
twist it a little bit more.
Yeah, and it's like if he cared, if he gave a shit at all, it's like, okay, schedule an interview, have a conversation about it. But like the fact that he not only like did a half-ass notes apology, but also like lumped in Britney and Janet in the same thing, where it's like, oh babe, it's okay. I'm just gonna I'm just imagining like Jessica Biel coming in and he's like on his laptop, like typing with 2 fingers. And she's like, babe, are you coming to bed? It's 9 p.m. And he's like, hold on. I just watched the Framing Britney doc. I think I fucked up Janet Jackson's career too, so I'm gonna put that in here as well.
Like I gotta say something before bed.
Like I've never heard this before, but apparently Janet Jackson.
He's like, okay, hold on, just like one more sentence. My publicist sent me a checkoff list of things I need to mention. Okay, That's all in there and sent.
He copies, it's like copy white male privilege from his like PR's email, paste into the apology. Quote, white male privilege.
Yeah, it's like, babe, what's white male privilege? Do you know what that is? And she's like, our son's not vaccinated. And he's like, oh, yes.
Yeah, everybody hates us. So yeah. And it's like, you couldn't just, like, can you imagine how different that whole thing would have gone for him if he had just even hopped on like Instagram live? Like hop on a live and be like, you know what? I'm laying in bed watching this fucking documentary, and obviously I have to address this, and I'm just going to be honest with you guys about how I feel about it. Even that would have been, I would have been so open to just hearing the thoughts of an adult man who now has a child that has gone through all of these experiences. Like, yeah, you were really young when this all happened, so it would be interesting to hear what you think of what you did. Like, be a fucking adult about it.
Yeah.
Literally, like, hop on your Instagram. Like, this is 2021. This is not, like, 1999. You don't have to call into TRL 5 days after something happens to make a point. You know what I mean? Like, get on the internet and just say what you thought. But it's like, you're releasing a fucking notes app apology?
Yeah.
Like, are you kidding?
The bare minimum.
Yeah.
But also, like, a part of me really just wants him on, like, 60 Minutes and, like, Diane Sawyer or somebody else to just, like, absolutely grill him. Like, I don't know if she would, but, like, I want him to be absolutely grilled on television.
Oprah should be like, were you silent or were you silenced?
I just want this meme from Oprah for Justin. I want the I can't meme.
Yeah, just like, nope. That's what you're saying is okay, you dumb white man. Like, it's just, yeah, I mean, like, that would have been such a good move for him to just, like, raw be like, I watched this is how I'm feeling. Like, it's no excuse, but like I was just like a dumb teen blinded by fame, whatever. Like, there's so many things that he could say as you said, like a grown-ass man with a child and a wife. Like, and like, this is the annoying thing. It's like, yes, like being married to somebody shouldn't change your view on women. Like, you should just have, like, view women as people regardless. But like marriage, especially marriage with a child, does change somebody and like does sort of force you to view the world in a different way. And it's just so crazy. Like, the whole thing is just crazy because like when you do think about it, like as we said in so many different ways, it's like Justin's career was created in such a way that it's like everything that he did was like, felt like it was pre-planned. It feels like, looking back on it, like he had like a filing cabinet of like how to deal with every scenario possible and like a getaway plan and all these things in place, because I feel like that's what pageant life prepares you for, is to always be overly prepared for everything and like how to control X, Y, and Z so that you always come out on top and you always remain like famous and unscathed or whatever. And I mean, honestly, it's like, it's a breath of fresh air that people have been talking about that Justin Timberlake's a garbage man. And like, I feel like this conversation's been happening for a while now, and now finally more people are talking about it. But I just remember just like growing up, I just always had this like disdain towards him and I wasn't really sure why. And then like as I got more into like pop culture and journalism and stuff and just like going back and looking at things, it's like this dude was like, it was messed up. Like, yes, he constantly had bad role models in his life, but that doesn't mean that he should have like followed, like, it's not like they didn't know that Lou Pearlman was a bad man. Like they knew Lou Pearlman was a bad man. So it's like, why are you doing similar shit to what Lou Pearlman was doing in your own personal life, in your own like narrative, when you like know he was a bad man and that you had to get out of that relationship? Like, why are you doing similar things to him?
That's the thing that I always say is so wild, is like he sort of relied on the fact that he knew Britney was a good person. Mm-hmm. He knew that Britney wouldn't necessarily out him for like his house of cards that he had built. Mm-hmm. And Britney like knew where all the bodies were buried. They all knew where all of each other's bodies were buried. You know, they were all around for each other's, you know, initial negotiations and contracts being written up, and you're going to be a virgin and we're going to, you know, like all of that stuff. And she was there during all of the Lou Pearlman stuff. She saw all of it. Mm-hmm. So Britney knows a lot of really weird shit about his life. You know what I mean? And like she very easily could have changed the narrative about what people think of him if she wanted to. And he just sort of banked on the, you know, the fact that he knew she wouldn't, you know, he just knew she wouldn't do that. And like, that's also so shitty.
Unfortunately, there's so many garbage men in the world of showbiz, and we're just here. Troy is here to out them all. And I love every second of it because they're all like, it's just so frustrating. Because I mean, like, if we like ventured outside of the world of music, like the amount of men that we could drag into this conversation is unfortunately endless, and it's just so upsetting and frustrating. I don't know. Jenna, do you have any conclusion thoughts?
I mean, I just hope that like now that we're like finally having these conversations a bit more publicly, that things will start to change. However, I think it'll be a very slow change. Justin Timberlake Oprah interview 2021.
Oh God, yes. Put it out there.
Start the petition online.
Seriously.
All right, so we are back with Band of the Week in 30 seconds or less. We're doing something a little different. Today, Troy is going to talk about Britney Spears as if she's debuting and we're in 1999. So get in that mindset, get ready. Troy, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, I'm going to count you down in 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so this new artist, her name is Britney Spears. She is a response to, I don't know if you guys are a fan of Robin, but she is a response to the Robin pop craze that has taken over Europe. She is America's version of Robin, which people don't ever talk about. And she's iconic. She's going to literally change the face of pop music forever. And her discography is super weird. So there's something for everybody. Hasn't happened yet, but it has happened. Just go with it. That's it.
That's 30 seconds.
Oh my God. Can't wait to check her out.
She sounds amazing.
Well, Troy, thank you so much for joining us today. Of course, people can go learn more about all of these characters on your podcast, Dunzo. And are there any social links people can follow up with you otherwise?
I mostly use Instagram for the podcast. So it's Dunzo Pod, or it's Dunzo Podcast. You'll find it. You can follow me on everything at Troy McEady. It's TroyMceady. And there's a Patreon for the podcast too if you're interested in that type of thing. It's patreon.com/solidlisten, and it's like a 4-year archive of me having manic thoughts into a Blue Yeti microphone.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. This was so much fun. Seriously.
So I knew Troy knew everything before we started recording, but
he really does know everything.
I'm just so impressed, and it's so nice to talk to other people who pay attention to pop culture essentially for a living that also hate the same people that we hate.
I mean, well put.
It's been very exciting watching Jenna sort of become aware of all of this stuff because, from what you guys have learned, my background is pop culture nonsense. And so it's really incredible watching your friends become aware of like how trash these men are when like I feel like you already sort of knew, but now you like.
Yeah, no, it's funny, especially because like Sarah, like as a few months ago mentioned Justin Timberlake being trash. And I'm like, okay. But now that we're into it, I'm like, oh, yeah, you're right. And so maybe you're like me, you're listening along and you're in the same position as I am, realizing along with me how trash these men are.
Yeah, and so we've already said it 1,000 times, but Troy over on his podcast Dunzo has talked at length about Britney. He's talked about Mariah. He's also talked about Mandy Moore. So he's talked about all of the 3 main women that we discussed today. So if you want to learn more about them, especially Britney, go check out his podcast. You can learn everything you ever wanted to learn. And he also covers just like normal celebs, so it's not just music. So there's lots of pop culture knowledge to be learned and had from him. So if you enjoyed today's podcast and you'd like to chat with us more about it, you can come join us on our Patreon. Come hang out at our Discord. You can do that at patreon.com/name3songs, or you can tweet at us, slide in our DMs on Insta, come watch us make ridiculous TikToks, all at name3songs. Or if you want to fight us, what have you, you can do that personally. I'm at Sarah_Fagan and Jenna is at Jenna_million. So thank you so much for joining us on Name3Songs. Until next time, never let anyone make you feel bad about your favorite band.
And remember, you're never too cool to listen to Grammy winner Harry Styles.
Don't forget to subscribe to be notified when each episode comes out and leave us a 5-star review. They really help.
If you want to find out more about any of the sources we referenced in this episode, you can visit name3songs.com.